So Battlefield 2042 is a game that came out and, to put it mildly, disappointed a whole bunch of people. Not me, cause I already didn't like 5, so I was pretty sure that the next entry was not going to suddenly make it all better. A while ago, the game had one of those free weekends on Steam, so I decided to install it and play it for a bit. See if I could experience some of the jankiness and bugs firsthand, you know, just overall have a laugh at the expense of the game. And I mostly did. But when Monday came and all was said and done, I returned home from work, sat in front of my computer and realized I kinda want some more of that shit. And thus I decided to not only play some more Battlefield 2042, but also take it a bit more seriously and truly get to the bottom of my apparent enjoyment of this game. So with my hands on mouse and keyboard, headset on my head and a month of EA Play in my name, I set out to find out just how bad Battlefield 2042 really is. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I like my stuff segmented into clearly distinguishable parts. As such, I'll be separately discussing the following things I've experienced across some 40 hours of playtime. Current state of the game and whether or not it looks more like a finished product than it did at launch. Things that I think are wrong, not from a technical standpoint but rather the core design of the game itself. And finally, things that are genuinely good and I enjoyed. If this all sounds mildly interesting, stick around. As far as the overall condition of Battlefield 2042, I would say it is very much a playable game, with only a couple of annoying issues. I had an issue with a black screen crash when returning to the menu after the end of a match. This happened often enough to be pretty annoying, but not enough to be game breaking. Give or take 10 to 15 times in my 40 hours of playtime. Second most annoying thing that happened to me is Origin related. One time I went to play 2042 and it just wouldn't launch. This was after the free weekend ended and I got the month of EA Play, so only Origin was required to launch the game. After about an hour of troubleshooting and trying a bunch of stuff, including downloading the whole game again, I finally got it to work by uninstalling the game, uninstalling Origin, deleting any files that could be related to Origin from my computer, then installing and downloading everything again. And I wish I could tell you that I only had to do that once, but it happened twice. Also, if you will allow me to momentarily put on my tinfoil hat, I gotta say it is a bit strange how all the issues began after I cancelled my EA Play subscription. I don't know about you, but I'm honestly pretty tired of games being on Steam, but also requiring a second launcher to be installed and initiated along with it. I'm looking at you EA, and I'm also looking at you Ubisoft. You will not find a single person praising your intrusion in their gaming sessions. I for one am pretty sure I've never had to do anything even remotely similar to this with a game on Steam. The final big issue I experienced was strangely amusing. I had a couple of matches where things were invisible. It started innocently enough with a car, then a helicopter, and finally my own gun. I gotta admit I found this much more entertaining than it really is. The invisible gun match in particular had me changing my whole strategy. Since I had no way to aim, I found myself leading my shots using the tracers. While these types of bugs are usually the more obvious ones that people used to point out at games like a Polish, I actually don't mind them that much if they aren't very frequent. If it's funny or amusing while not being game breaking, I personally welcome the distraction from time to time. All of these things are a bit contentious, I would say, because when discussing PC gaming, almost every computer is unique in their composition. And as such, there is a chance that these are issues unique to my rig. It is also worth noting that my specs are above the minimum but below the recommended specs to run 2042, specifically the GPU. The thing that actually surprised me the most about this game is how janky it is. Aside from the visual jank, of which there was plenty of beyond invisible things, some things just don't feel right when playing. Hits will sometimes not register, and not in any uncertain kind of way, but in a you can see blood coming out of your enemy kind of way. Destruction feels a bit random as well. Nowadays this is a feature that is a given in the Battlefield franchise, so I don't pay attention to it that much, but here it just feels off. A 40mm grenade should blow up this wall, right? Well, it doesn't, and neither does a second one, nor a frag grenade. But by far the thing that bothered me the most is the clunky character movement. This is something that might be a little hard to show you because it's more of a thing you feel while playing. The most clear example I have is when you try to strafe as a sniper. For those of you unfamiliar with being a Battlefield sniper, it doesn't look like this. This is a great way to get shot by another sniper. What you do is you observe the area while moving side to side like a maniac to make your pretty head a less tempting target. At first I thought I was losing my mind, so I installed BF1 to check, and look at this. I'm pressing the same keys for the same amount of time. Shit, I'm writing this and I don't know if you'll be able to tell from the footage. The 2042 movement feels like you're on ice or some other slippery surface. There's a very clear input lag from when you press the movement keys and when your character decides to do what they're told. This didn't happen all the time, but when it did, I really hated it. Now, I've been a PC gamer my whole life. I'm used to jank in games, and as a matter of fact, some of my favorite games of all time are also some of the jankiest shit you can play. But this is a AAA studio, and a franchise that's supposedly been polished to a mirror's shine before. This game, being as janky as it is not only shocking, but also unacceptable if you ask me. Let's move on to the design, where I think we'll find the issues that make 2042 particularly sour for longtime fans of the franchise. My first and sadly most immediate grievance is the way you go about joining a game. You select the game mode and the game finds you a match, as simple as it is restrictive. Setting aside the fact that there's no server browser, even by matchmaking standards, 2042 lacks the very basic feature of selecting more than one mode to search for. Maybe you wouldn't mind being placed in either Conquest or Rush. In other games you could ask for either, which would, among other things, probably shorten the time you wait to play the game. Not here though. Now, let's say that the matchmaking has found a game for you to join. Off you go to the loading screen, wait a bit for the level to load up, and wait for other players to join. So you matchmake, you load the level, and then you're greeted with a screen that tells you that you're actually a bit early and the party cannot start yet. Circling back to the lack of a server browser, if I had chosen to join a match with few players in it, I would understand them making me wait, but the game put me here. Now that we're finally in a match and ready to play, we can talk about the metaphorical elephant in the room. And what an elephant this is in such a tiny, tiny room. Oh hi, it's future me once again, interrupting the video. I was just about to begin talking about how 2042 removes the class system that we all know and love and replaces it with specialists and loadouts, and how that kinda sucks. Well, since I always stay way too long in making these videos, guess what? As of February 2023, classes are back in the game. They finally added one of the many things that were already in the previous games and had no reason whatsoever to do away with. The game still features the specialists, so I'm gonna skip ahead to the part where I complain about them. Sorry for the interruption, video continues in 3, 2, 1. This, however, still leaves us with what I like to call the character conundrum. There is no limit as to what characters players select, in either of the two teams. This means that any player can run around and encounter exact copies of themselves as either friend or foe, sometimes several of them. Previous games had clearly defined character appearances, not only for each team, but within each class as well. This was very useful when it came to readability during gameplay and in distinguishing ally from enemy. It also gave each faction's classes a bit of personality. For example, I always liked how the Russian medic in Bad Company 2 wore a red beret. It is also lucky that there is no friendly fire in 2042 because blue on blue would be a constant in every match. I have experienced several instances in which an ally or an enemy or even myself were confused by a character's appearance and either shut up a friendly character or ignored an enemy. The coming rework to the class system should, in my opinion, include locking certain characters to either the US or Russian armies. To be honest, however, the problems derived from the introduction of this system are not what actually bothers me, but rather the motive behind it. I really hate how transparent it is that Battlefield has been trying to play catch up with Call of Duty since Modern Warfare and Warzone released. I genuinely fail to understand the thought process of whoever is handling these decisions. As far as I can tell, it goes like this.
Activision has released a game with guns in it.
And a free-to-play mode inspired by one of the biggest games in the world.
They are making some serious money, we need to get in on that.
We have a franchise that makes games with guns. Begin production of a game with guns. Prioritize a monetization model like the one Activision is using.
It will be done. Rules of engagement, sir?
Quality expendable.
The reality, however, is more complicated. Activision did not simply release the game with guns. It was a reboot of their most successful brand, that returned the franchise to its roots with a pinch of nostalgia for good measure. It also happened to be a very good game. And as much as I don't love Warzone, particularly its effect on the narrative seriousness of Call of Duty, I can't argue against it and Modern Warfare being well polished and finished products that both reviewed and sold very well. I understand trying to compete in a saturated market, but changing core features that make your game stand out is not the way, especially when everyone can see why you did it. Battlefield is not just any other shooter. It's always been about massive battles with tanks and airplanes and, you guessed it, tactical team gameplay with squads and classes. Being a faceless grunt in a larger conflict was very much part of the core appeal of the franchise, and the introduction of these cool and quirky characters is not only very jarring and out of place, but also makes very little sense, and breaks the illusion of being just one more soldier on a large battlefield. Speaking of the battlefields, aka the maps, this is an area that got a lot of criticism at launch because they sucked. Since then, a lot of them have been reworked with a few entirely new ones added. This seems to have done the trick, cause I did not mind the maps too much. I did not exactly love any of them particularly, but I also didn't hate any, which, you know, it's okay I guess, but a far cry from previous games where I always had a favorite.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
The legacy maps that they've added from previous games are a nice touch. However, as much as I loved rushing through Arica Harbor like I'm 18 years old again, I don't think leaning into nostalgia helps 2042's case. If the game was great, then this would be a welcome feature. As it stands, it's simply a constant reminder of better days. At least it was for me. Graphics wise, 2042 looks fine, I would say. I was able to run it with mostly max settings, though I did have to tweak a few things, due to my poor GPU who really only wants to retire.
Every moment I live is agony.
I've seen people criticize the graphics of this game, saying it looks terrible. To that, I have to say that if you mean terrible in the literal sense of the word, then I honestly do not agree. This is a fine looking game from most angles, and some of the classic only in Battlefield moments that I experienced managed to make me pause to admire the view. However, if by looks terrible you actually mean it looks pretty average for a Battlefield game, then I'm inclined to agree. This is a franchise that used to push the graphical boundaries of the genre. I think there's something about the visual design of 2042 that fails to establish an atmosphere for the game, leaving us with some pretty dull and lifeless results. It doesn't look bad, but also not mind-blowing and definitely not very memorable. I have a couple more things here written down, but I have very little to say about them, so I'll just mention them real quick. Gun variety is pretty bad in my opinion, and also similarly to the characters, the visual design of the weapons is a bit strange. This is something that you probably won't care much about unless you're a gun nut, but it can be confusing gameplay wise. What else? Let me see. The 128 player matches are a mistake. These games used to have very comfy 64 player battles, and I don't think anyone was begging for a bigger player count. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the stability issues that the game has are caused by this increase. I also didn't like this soundtrack at all. I know the composer has an Oscar and I really like everything else she's been in, but this just ain't it. Okay, let's stop the train of negativity for a couple minutes to talk about things that I think are pretty good. For starters, I actually think the setting of Battlefield 2042 is pretty well made. This is of course kind of a matter of personal preference, and I for one have always been a sucker for near future settings when it comes to military shooters. Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, Black Ops 2, Frontline's Fuel of War, remember that game? All of them my jam. The game being set in a world that's been shattered by a perfect storm of elements and further plunged into chaos by human intervention is something that I find very interesting. And while the execution has been less than ideal, I do hope that DICE returns the franchise to the 2040s sometime in the future. I also really like the Crysis style on-the-fly gun customization. It is very neat to be able to have a couple of different configurations for a weapon and swap between them on the field. Crysis came out in 2007 and since then I have seen very few games implement a feature like this, and it's a shame cause it's great. Now, believe it or not, I actually have something to say in favor of the monetization scheme of Battlefield 2042. Since 2011, with the release of Battlefield 3 until now, These games used to get expansion packs that could be purchased individually or as a bundle known as Battlefield Premium. As far as I can remember, the expansions were great. They added a lot of new weapons, features, and a ton of new maps to play around in. This added content, however, came with the disadvantage of dividing the player base, because if you did not purchase the expansion, you understandably could not access the new maps. Nowadays, dividing a multiplayer game's player base is widely understood to be a bad idea that does more harm than good in the long run. 2042 thankfully does not do that, with the monetization side of things being based around the often rightfully maligned cosmetic microtransactions. All playable content that's been added so far has been free for all player. Sure, I could nitpick and say that this could very well be a form of damage control in the face of the terrible reception, or that the content added to 2042 so far pales in comparison to what we used to get when expansions were premium. But at the end of the day, it is a pretty cool thing that everyone can play with everyone as long as they make the one-time purchase of the base game itself, and I feel it's worth mentioning. I am of the opinion that if I could choose, I would erase microtransactions and cosmetics from the face of the earth and return to the good old days of DLC expansions, particularly where military shooters are concerned. But the future is now. Adapt, survive, and keep having fun when the games are good is what I say. We dinosaurs of the genre still have pretty cool things to enjoy anyways. And now, finally, we arrive at the crux of the matter, something that I was pretty hesitant to include in this section. While 2042 is by and large the worst game in the franchise, at least so far, it is still very much Battlefield. Like I said, I played this game for about 40 hours and I would be lying to you if I said it was a chore or that I didn't have fun. Those only in Battlefield moments that the trailers mention, it's not just marketing buzzwords, those are still here. This is still the game where assaulting and clearing a point with your whole team feels awesome and exhilarating. Still the game where a single guy in a vehicle can ruin your squad's day. Still the game where you can be a jet fighter pilot, get bored of it, parachute out and continue being anything else. This is still the game where medics simply ignore you. I'm right here. I can smell your... This is still the game with the visually immersive moments that feel like a real war. There's simply something very special about knowing that all of the action currently on screen is not only unscripted but controlled by actual people playing the game just like you are. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this game still has all of the Battlefield DNA. Granted, it has it in the same way that those old European monarchs also had all of their family's DNA, but it's still a fun experience. I'm not gonna delve into the discussion of whether or not bad games can be fun or good games can be boring because I really don't feel like it will add anything to this video. At the end of the day, do I feel like Battlefield 2042 is worth playing? If you haven't played any of these games, then no. For the love of Sweden, no. Start somewhere else. Start with 3 or 4 or try to find a community to play the older titles. If you're a fan of the franchise and are absolutely starved for some new Battlefield, if you're like me and have already played too much of every other game that came before, and have delved into the likes of Squad and Hell Let Loose and found that it's not quite the same, then maybe, yeah, I guess. The keyword here is bittersweet. I can almost guarantee 100% that you will have fun, but it won't be without thinking about how good we used to have it. If you can ignore the sour taste, there's plenty of entertainment here, and seemingly getting better one season at a time. I do have to say though, please, do not pay full price for this. Get it on a generous sale or do like me and satisfy your craving with 1 or 2 months of EA play. I know the game is getting better and that there's very talented people probably giving their all to get it there, but this isn't a Hello Games with No Man's Sky situation. If this game gets a second wind, the lesson learned by the suits at EA won't be if we make a good game people will buy it and play it. No, it'll be more along the lines of, we can release a broken, unfinished piece of trash and then keep a possibly overworked skeleton crew slowly fixing it, and everything will be fine. Okay, let's wrap things up a bit. Like many disappointing entries in long-running franchises, Battlefield 2042's biggest issues can seemingly be traced directly to corporate decisions made by its publisher, with the two most clear being trend chasing and a rushed development, giving us a final product that not only pales in comparison with its predecessors, but also changes its basic formula for the worst in most cases. However, it is true that Battlefield's most basic gameplay elements are still there. and its gameplay loop is still entertaining. Matches are still a great sandbox of magnificent chaos, and the progression of unlocks remains an engaging grind that feels rewarding. I've been playing these games since Christmas 2004 and I've seen my fair share of changes to the franchise, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. It is definitely nice that Battlefield can still entertain me like it used to, but I simply can't ignore the sour taste that comes with an adult's knowledge of the video game industry. I have no insight into the development of this game. Maybe someone at DICE is responsible for some of the issues I mentioned, but come on, this is Electronic Arts we're talking about. 1/3 of the axis of shitty business practices in the industry. If DICE had simply made a bad game, well, they've been doing this for 20 years with mostly great success. You are allowed a big stinker. But nowadays, it feels like every time a big AAA game ends up mediocre, it's always for the same reason, and it honestly blows. Can we do anything about this? Well, for one, stop pre-ordering games, guys. As I'm writing this, Hogwarts Legacy has been the best-selling game on Steam for 2 weeks in a row. You don't have to pre-order games. You don't even have to pay full price for games. The patient gamer always wins. Don't give in to FOMO or the promises of pre-order goodies. Don't be like me, I learned my lesson a few years ago, trust me. The games are still gonna be there a week, a month, or a year after release, and then you can see if they're worth your hard-earned money. Now, before we finish, I would like to say a couple of things. Firstly, address something from my previous video that was brought to my attention. I spent several minutes talking about Deep Rock Galactic and never once did I rock and stone. I will now correct my mistake by pressing the button until I get my favorite of the voice lines, which is...
For those about to rock and stone, we salute you!
I will also seek to atone by drinking 10 Leaf Lover specials in a row. Hopefully my fellow miners can forgive me.
May your beards be thick and your gold satchels heavy. Oh, that's nice.
On a more serious note, I always end my videos by thanking you, the viewer. I believe everyone in this platform does, or at least I think it should be the case. But I wanted to quickly explain just how true that is. I don't like to overshare about my personal life on social media, so I will simply say that this past month of January was a rough one economically for my family. And near the end of the month, when most people tend to be very stressed about bills and expenses and the like, along came the clutch income from my previous video. At the time of writing this, it has about 100k views, which may not be a lot in the grand scheme of YouTube, but was definitely enough to give us a little breathing room just when we needed it. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for watching. Consider liking and subscribing for more of these, game reviews and other stuff. I have to go now. I'm gonna treat the bite of nostalgia that I got from making this video. Oh.